how in the world are we going to get anyone to preserve these wonderful old homes if they can't sit out in their yard and enjoy it in peace and quiet, if they can't sell it because it gets vibrated and it gets shaken? What's that going to do to our property values, which is your taste, you know, your base for your taxes? That is a great concern of mine. We are just west of us. It's a secondary growth area. How's the secondary growth area going to grow if no one wants to live there? I was sort of caught off guard on this, and that because of Mr. Posner's passing, I think the original report went to his residence and didn't come to me as mayor. But once I started getting into it and realized the expanse of it, I did contact the base, and Lieutenant Colonel Hafner asked for a meeting. He very politely complied with that. Councilmember Jim Heimbach and I presented him with a response of opposition, which you have, and we asked that the public comment period be extended, and we asked for 2 public meetings for informational exchange. We got the extension on the public comment, and then about a week before Christmas, we were given a date of January 7th for a public information session. Both Supervisor Popowitz and Mr. Seeley were both there, and we appreciate their support and their attendance. I think the Army saw a very unified community. We had people from Essex, King George, town of Port Royal, of course, Portabago Bay, and from every place in between, west, east of 301, wonderful community support. And everyone seemed to be worried about the same things: protecting their homes, protecting their right to enjoy their home in peace and quiet, wanting the best for our troops, and truthfully not feeling that this is the best place for it. And I think that message came across. There were questions on health concerns. So what I have come here tonight to ask of you as a board is to join us in showing the Army that we're not just united as a community down on our little separate area of Port Royal, but that we are unified as a county, and that you will consider drafting a resolution in opposition to this movement by the Army, requesting General Chambers to find somewhere else to find his troops, that where they can train without restriction and without taking away from citizens what our troops fight for, which is the right to enjoy our country and our property, and to protect our homes. And so that is my request to you today, is that you do consider drafting a resolution and presenting it. I know the public comment period is over with, but I still think it's something we need to do to show unity in the county on this subject. And as far as technical questions go, you get the gentleman in back who can answer those for you. But as a citizen, I just ask that you join us in protecting our homes and our property values. Thank you.
Okay, if y'all would appreciate no applause during this process. The next speaker is from the, and really this is to let our board know, some things that's going on, because we're learning more today than we've known in the past. So certainly welcome. Just give us your name and the organization you represent, please.
Certainly. My name is John Lampman, and I'm representing the Portabago Bay Homeowners Association. First of all, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, we appreciate very much your willingness to hear us and to entertain some of the concerns that we have. We would hope tonight to bring to your attention some issues that evolved out of our continuing discussions with the Army and other elected officials over the last year and a quarter. Before I jump into that, I do want to thank, in particular, Supervisor Popowitz. This, as you can imagine, is the kind of issue that is very difficult for citizens. It goes to their home, In many cases, their single most important investment. Many people plan to retire on that investment. And so when that home appears to be in jeopardy and a problem, they become very concerned, very anxious, and sometimes just plain fearful. That can make for a very difficult kind of situation. And that's the kind of situation we faced more than a year and a quarter ago. We approached, and I specifically approached the supervisor. He's our Port Royal district supervisor. And from the beginning, he was responsive, just as I'm sure each of you is to your constituents. He listened. He gave us guidance. He gave us wise guidance. This is an issue of great importance to Caroline County. We realized we could not approach it without first taking it in a very cautious, detailed way, following up on details, consulting with the Army repeatedly over the course of many meetings, and also over the course of 3 different environmental assessments on this subject. His guidance in working with the Army, his guidance in working with our elected officials was critical in our being able to be at this point today, where the issue is ripe for a broader consideration and a resolution. So I want to thank Supervisor Popowitz for the kind of leadership that was not the easy, quick, so-called press release kind of leadership. It was the working, hands-on kind of role that's very helpful. I also want to thank the board members generally for their increasing involvement and interest in this. Mr. Seeley, I acknowledge you in particular because you were also at the meeting and involved. Briefly, I also want to thank the Army. I believe that what the Army is doing now, engaging, involved in direct communications, making the commitment of 2 major generals being present last Thursday to look at this issue, demonstrates not only how important it is to the Army, but how important it is to the county and all of us. Now, the immediate issue, of course, is the EOD proposed training site. Before I jump into 3 issues that relate to economic impact and issues that we feel they surfaced while we were in talks and reviewing these issues, and they are issues which I think are of direct importance and interest to the Board of Supervisors. But before I address those 3 issues, I want to make one quick mention of the issue of the methodology of noise evaluation and these 3 environmental assessments. I'm going to submit for the record a 1-pager that summarizes the kind of methodological concerns that citizens have about the way the Army has approached this issue. We think it's important to the Board of Supervisors because you, as the board, on behalf of the citizens of the county, have the responsibility of reviewing Army proposals on a continuing basis, new missions, changes in the use of the facility, and so on. And when noise analysis is used, it's important that the methodology be up to the standards that are appropriate for citizens to protect their interests and to protect the county's interests. The methodologies are, in our view, disturbingly frail in their structure. They're mathematical models, but as models, they're not anchored to real data. To the extent that they may be, it's very old data. The relevancy may be in question. That the mathematical models are not anchored to the topography of Fort A.P. Hill. These are just to suggest a few things. The analysis has been done only for 90% of the detonations that will occur in the proposed mission. So we have 10% analysis available to us. The lists of weapons or explosives that would be used in this training has changed on all three lists. So we have moving targets just about everywhere. That is not the kind of analysis that would be helpful for decision-making purposes when the board has to look at and review these matters on behalf of the public. Now let me go forward with 3 items that relate to economic impact. And in doing this, my purpose here is not to provide you with a definitive statement of what the actual economic impact may or may not be involving the relationship of the Army and Caroline County. The data is initial, it's preliminary. Some of it we generated, some of it is the Army data, and I'll distinguish between the two. The purpose here is to raise concerns that from a planning point of view, and as we go forward in looking at the relationship between the Army and Fort A.P. Hill and Caroline County, it may be a little bit of a new day where we need to look at some of these factors and start thinking about the policy implications. First, excuse me a second. I want to look backward just a moment, if I may. We took a look, we went to a website. It's on the government contracting websites. And it tracks government contracts by counties, by states, all across the country. It also issues opportunities for bidding for government contractors. It's a very comprehensive resource. Again, I'm not saying it's definitive, but it does suggest some issues that may be of interest to the board. We looked at contracts let by DOD to Caroline County contractors and compared that with the contracts let by DOD to neighboring county contractors. Our findings were these. Between the years 2000 and 2008, a total of 9 years, Caroline County received $7.4 million in DOD contracts. In other words, contractors residing in Caroline County receive those contracts. Now, there are 4 other counties in the neighboring area. Basically, the city of Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, Stafford, and King George counties. For those 4 counties and Caroline County, the total amount of DOD contracts received by local contractors was $1.955 billion in the 9-year period. Spotsylvania, for instance, got $337 million over that 9 years, or about $70.8 million a year. Stafford, $530 million, or about $59 million a year. King George received $499 million, or about $35.5 million a year. And the city of Fredericksburg, $281 million, or about $31 million a year. And again, contractors in Caroline County got $7.4 million, or about $822,000 a year. Now I repeat, this data is not definitive. There's lots of other data. There's even other data on the very same site or source. For example, the contracting office for Fort A.P. Hill issued contracts totaling $63.6 million in the same time period. That's about 8 times, they issued about 8 times the number of contracts that were received by our local contractors. The Army needs to input into this data as well. For example, I'm sure that I would hope that it's a matter of course, that the Army documents exactly all those $63.6 million in contracts over the 9 years so that they can be, when appropriate, when the business comes into the county, can be taxed. and business taxes and other taxes applied appropriately. We certainly, in the course of going forward with these kinds of dollars, need to be able to have the Army step up and be sure that they're doing their fair role as a neighbor in the county and as a citizen when it comes to those kinds of data. More generally, on the issue of the disparate difference between Caroline County receipts and neighboring county receipts, we're not saying that the county should be receiving a fair share of all this money now. That would be unpractical and unreasonable. But we think as a matter of course that this will become a growing, important issue to the Board of Supervisors in the years ahead. And that the board, the recommendation is that the board engage the Army in direct consultations and talks to explore the implications of the recent past history of the financial relations support to the county. Now, I want to just speak secondly on these economic issues about some other startling data that in itself doesn't really move us forward very much, except that it raises very important issues. This proposed training at Fort A.P. Hill is essentially a part of a process whereby at Fort Lee, 70 miles south of us, 23,000 soldiers a year will be housed. They will have classrooms, and they will do all their classroom type training at Fort Lee. They then will be bused here to Caroline County, and those 23,000 soldiers will then be doing their field training here. Now, the numbers I'm giving you now are the Army's numbers. And the Army's numbers are that the impact on incomes in the Fort Lee area, surrounding area, in other words, jobs, will be $1.5 billion. The Army's numbers also indicate that the impact in that area on sales revenue, increased sales tax revenue, will be $1 billion. Now here in Caroline County, the Army says that the impact of the field training will not have a significant impact. In other words, it's the Army's stated finding that you won't even notice the impact of the expenditures on behalf of the field training here at Fort A.P. Hill. Now that disparate difference is thought-provoking. The folks in Fort Lee, God bless them and God bless the Army, they need the training. We don't want to take anything away from them. We're not saying that Caroline County should have equal treatment. We're not suggesting that either. But we are saying when you have that kind of disparate difference and they get all the benefits 70 miles south of us, and we get the explosive noise and the consequences of the field training, then that raises an issue about the kind of relationship and what's happening with the Army that becomes, we believe, a matter for the board to look at, and again, a reason for the board to engage the Army so that there's more focus in the discussions, more information, and more understandings about what is in the mutual interests of both the Army and the citizens of Caroline County. I'm going to do a third impact that I think really has most of its ramifications into the future. That impact is something that we're all aware of. We've heard about the Army's ACUB program, which is essentially a program whereby the Army is acquiring the residential development rights to land in the Fort A.P. Hill area. Now, the exact amount of land that's targeted is actually 35,000 acres. In other words, about half the size of the current Fort A.P. Hill, which is 76,000 acres, or a fifth of the county land base. Now, as we step into this for a minute, we realize that that fifth is not subject to county taxation. So we might be looking at a situation where additional tax impact may occur with the attempt to acquire those 35,000 acres. Okay, now, before I get into the exact explanation of the difference here, which is actually very brief, I do want to make a couple things very clear. First of all, buying and selling residential development rights is perfectly, totally legal. Buyers and sellers of residential development property rights are honorable people, and they do it, presumably in most cases, for totally legitimate business reasons, personal finance reasons. There are nonprofit groups in this area that are supportive and try to further just these kinds of arrangements to preserve the quality of life in this county, which we all are committed and want to preserve. The problem is not with the individual deal or even the law in that point, for that matter. The problem is where there is a coordinated, concerted effort using federal tax dollars, by the way, along with other dollars, to actually acquire the residential development rights for up to 35,000 acres of county land. There's a policy problem here. Now let me, in a nutshell, explain what it is. If for instance, you're going to purchase a residential property right, I'm going to make this just a couple points and not go into all the detail. The point is that you look at the land use of the land. Let's say it's farming. You look at the land use, and then you look at the potential best use of the land. The difference between the value of the best use, potential use, and the land use is the residential development value. The owner of the property gets that in credits, may even get some of it in cash, but it's essentially a good buy, a good sell for the property owner. If you look, and I believe in some discussions with the Army, this is their position, but I don't speak for the Army. But if you look at that deal on a single piece of land, the day before the deal is consummated, our county tax rate on that land is the land use, farming, for instance. When the deal's consummated, the day after the deal, it's still the tax on the land use. The public benefit is on the land use of the land. You look at that and you say, with that snapshot, what's the problem? What's the public interest in this whole issue? Well, the public issue arises, I suggest, first when you have 35,000 acres target of county land, which is a tax base, and when you look at the deals through time. This isn't a snapshot. This is more like a motion picture. Let's move fast speed ahead 50 years. The land use of that land, say farming, the economics of that could be entirely different. Entirely different. And to make the point, all you got to do is look back 50 years and what the land use and what the economics of farming were 50 years ago and what they are today. Nobody can say what that future use, whether it's going to be economical or not economical. The implications are that we're locking in that land, large tracts of lands, tens of thousands of acres of land, to a use which may or may not be relevant, to a tax value that may or may not relate to anything that relates to the county citizens' needs, and we're capping it. In no time through eternity, because these deals are for eternity, can that land ever be used for residential development purposes? Now, there are other implications that spin off inside, but that's the big picture. The implications, the policy implications for Caroline County, and then obviously for you as our elected representatives, of these kinds of arrangements need to be looked at and reviewed. The community development staff folks, the planning process should be taking a look at this. We would encourage the board to take a look at this. There are lots of different views and ways of talking about it, but big picture, these issues are way too important for the county not to begin to engage more and more in addressing these economic impact questions as we move into a very fast changing future. Those three impacts were impacts that came to our attention just in the normal course of working with the Army and others on this whole process. And we thank you for the opportunity to bring them to your attention. We urge you to engage the Army, engage others, and look for ways to address these issues. Look at the ramifications policy-wise given the relationship now between the Army and the citizens of Caroline County. Is this a relationship we can build on for the future? How do we do it? All the citizens involved in this whole effort are absolutely committed in their support daily of our fighting men and women. We are committed to a strong working relationship with the Army on the Hill. But we feel that the facts that I've laid out and other facts suggest that any good working relationship or partnership needs to be founded on a sound economic foundation. And we think there are issues there that need to be addressed. We think and hope that you will find them of interest as well. And we look forward to working with you in any way possible to support your efforts on behalf of the citizens of the county. Again, I thank you for your patience and your willingness to entertain our suggestions.
All right, sir. We certainly appreciate your comments and the update to the board. And sometime in the near future, we may have some more questions for you. Not necessarily we'll get into them tonight, but we certainly open the doors for any dialogue, and we look forward to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Lieutenant Colonel Heffner, just from a point of view to you update the board on some things that's going on, if you guys would like to address the board, I think certainly we had a consensus of the board that we would welcome you to do that at this time. If you would like, it's totally up to you. I know it's short notice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members. Fort A.P. Hill, we pride ourselves on a great relationship with Caroline County. Ever since our 70 years that we have been here, we've worked through some tough times, worked through some good times, and I think we're always kind of improving incrementally. To wit, the EOD school process, I'm not going to speak much about it right now because it still is in a NEPA comment process right now. The process did close on the 11th of January. We're working through the 648 pages of testimonial, taking the other night at Port Royal, taking all the other input we have received, and we're going through that in a pretty deliberate and robust process. Now, what comes out of an environmental assessment is normally a document called a FONSI, a finding of no significant impact. But let me qualify that that document is an environmental protection Act document of 1969, okay? It is not an economic impact document. It is not any other impacts besides environmental impacts, okay? The purpose of the 1969 NEPA law is to make sure that environmental factors were given the same regard as other construction factors, terrain, materials, things of that nature. But what I need to do is I feel I need to respond to two issues that were brought up today. One, in terms of economic impact, which we can provide data at the board's request. I'm not going to provide hard data in that right now. But I will say that from some comments that I've heard, there's sort of a false premise that there is a level playing field among all installations, okay? It's kind of an apples and oranges when you compare us to other installations like Dahlgren. We have a very, very, very different mission from Dahlgren. Also, there's a lack of understanding of federal law in terms of what I need to go through for contracting. I have to put out those for bid, and they have to go to quite a few different locations by law, and sometime the county might not qualify based on the service that's being asked to be rendered, okay? So I want to make sure we don't mix apples and oranges in terms of what the service is being requested, what can be rendered, and what I have to go through in terms of federal appropriations law. On ACUB, the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program, I need to correct a number of assertions that we believe at best are misleading and at worst completely erroneous related to our efforts to work with nearby landowners and a number of conservation-minded organizations in preserving rural and agricultural properties adjacent to Fort A.P. Hill. The Army Compatible Use Buffer Program, we commonly hear it called ACUB, is a program of a national program established under the auspices of the Readiness and Environmental Protection Initiative, the REPI program. This program is part of a larger effort within the Department of Defense to implement congressional authority given to the Office of the Secretary of Defense in the military services, that's the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, to partner with outside organizations to conserve land near military installations. The primary goal is to preserve and encourage land use that are compatible with military's training, testing, and operational requirements. It's about protecting America's investment in readiness and ensuring our military members can train as they expect to fight. Under an ACUB easement, the Army provides all or part of the funding for an easement on a property. The landowner is a willing party. The landowner is a willing party to this and indeed often solicits that easement. The conservation party holds the easement, not the Army, not the federal government. The Army has no interest in the property. Our only interest is to train, and we must in order to prevail on behalf of all Americans. The work Fort A.P. Hill is doing with conservation partners inside the area designed as our top priority for ACUB-related easements aligns impeccably with Virginia's and the Mid-Atlantic's goals of protecting our watersheds feeding the Chesapeake Bay. This runs primarily along the Route 17 corridor, and it also supports the last two governors' goals in open space preservation. Our ACUB program simply facilitates easements on land close to Fort A.P. Hill found desirable for conservation to our partners, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Trust for Public Land, Virginia Outdoors Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, and the Conservation Fund. They hold the easements, not the Army. The willing landowner participates and gets money that helps him or her keep the family farm and the land intact, and we see that as a good thing. It has been alleged that the Army is extending its borders via this program. This is patently false, and those making those charges have been advised that it is false. The Army isn't taking possession of that land or training on that land, etc. The family or landowner retains full possession and continues to be a tax-paying citizen of the locality. We currently have more interested landowners than we have available funds. Apparently, these citizens don't see this initiative as a negative for them and their community. Related to the charge that ACUB easements are taking the future tax revenues of a locality. Many of the landowners we work with or who have expressed interest in ACUB have had their properties in land use status for years. They have a strong interest in preserving their family's farm and rural heritage and readily avail themselves of tax advantages. Landowners who donate conservation easements enjoy state and federal tax advantages, since these easements are recognized as good things. What is better from a community point of view? Enabling a willing family farmer via a paid easement to keep the farm, or having a tax scenario where he or she is forced to sell or perhaps to developers. Conserving fish and wildlife habitat and farmland, protecting watersheds, and more is a gift to future generations. It certainly contrasts with the gift of adding more sprawl to the traditional backlogs of thousands of homes already zoned to be built but have yet to be built. Further, I would think analysis of the parcels considered for ACUB-related easements would show, in fact, that an easement is cost neutral to a locality from a tax standpoint and a long-term cost avoidance, given the documented studies showing that revenues from residential development do not pay for the cost of delivering the services needed by that residential development. Well-respected studies show that residential development does not pay for itself. The American Farmland Trust has a landmark study that shows that the median cost of services for every $1 received from working in open lands, the cost locality provided services is 37 cents. On the other hand, the median cost of services for every $1 associated with residential land is $1.19. That's a negative value. Some studies peg this as high as $1.67. These are costs that continue forever, actually increasing over time. Fort A.P. Hill has existed for nearly 70 years as a federal land. It is somewhat mystifying how it can be viewed as a fifth of any Caroline tax base or a drain on that tax base. It is federal land situated largely within the confines of a Virginia locality while also abutting Essex County. It has been a training land over that area for 70 years. Fort A.P. Hill asks for no services from Caroline County, yet is a good neighbor providing extensive mutual aid support in an area of law enforcement agencies, recreational opportunities for thousands, and more. For instance, we provided 170 mutual aid calls to Caroline County in the last 3 years. So you have an idea how much it costs to roll out any fire engine, multiply that times 170, and you see the cost of doing that business. The sights, sounds, and smells of military training have persisted for generations at Fort A.P. Hill. ACUB is just one tool to try to preclude conflict with incompatible residential development situated too close to those sights, sounds, and smells of military training. Terry Banks of our Environmental Engineering Division is at Fort Bragg tonight, preparing to be part of a sustainability seminar for the entire Army. She was asked to give a presentation related to Fort A.P. Hill and ACUB. Both DOD and the Army see what is going on here as a positive and good thing for our nation. Please understand that this comment doesn't relate to the public process. Like I said, that's playing out for the EOD mission concerned. We at Fort A.P. Hill were the ones who voluntarily extended that public comment period, specifically so people with worries and observations could make them heard and have them answered on the record. The normal public comment period for environmental assessment is 30 days. We gave the county about 179 days. This relates solely to the ongoing apparent effort to undermine ACUB and the broader sustainability of military training areas. Thank you. We would be happy to provide at a later time more detailed presentation of our compatible use buffer objectives and our work to try to ensure both the Department of Defense and its neighbors can exist in a mutually supportive relationship with minimal conflict. And General, I can provide these comments if you'd like to as written matters, probably tomorrow. I got a lot of chicken scratch on them. Thank you very much.
Okay, Lieutenant Colonel, we certainly appreciate you being here in the short period of time that you had to get here, and we certainly appreciate that. I'm sure we'll take you up on your offer to probably maybe find some more details of what's what's going on. I would say that Mr. Popovich has been involved somewhat in the process more closely than the rest of us, because this certainly is affecting the constituents in his district.
Sure.
And rightfully so. He should have his pulse on the community.
Sure.
And but still, I think the rest of our board probably, from what we've just been reading in the paper and hearing from other folks, it leads us to probably have some more unanswered questions that we would like some answers to, that would probably you all can provide to us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And at sometime in the near future, I'm sure we'll want to do that. Because I know personally, you've heard things, and I don't know all the facts. Yeah. And as a board member for the county, I think all of us should know. And I know we have shared a good response back and forth on our county zonings. When we have county zonings and rezonings, we ask you guys to give us input, and we appreciate that, because I think everybody understands your mission, and we want to protect your mission. It's vital to us. And maybe, moving forward, we'll find a way that we'll make sure we'll get the information flowing the other way, so we can kind of have more details regularly, maybe with our planning department, of some boundary line issues that we have occurring, for more details for us.
Sure.
And again, we appreciate you coming. Board members, I don't know in tonight's session if we want to get into a lot more details. By the time we finish our discussion, we'll be into an hour of this. And Mr. Popovich, I know you spent a lot of time and effort here, and the people have said. How many people are here from the Port Royal area? If y'all just raise your hands. Okay, so we have a good idea of the people here from the Port Royal area, so we understand who's here. Okay, what's that? Yeah, if we could get if you have comments, Mr. Popovich, and then from the board, we'll do that. I don't know if we want to get any back and forth across to doing questions tonight. I think we're not really ready for that. This was really meant to be, from what I understand, informational, and we appreciate those of you who provided information. So, Mr. Popovich.
Sure. I think that from the standpoint of what we've been working on for the last year, though, that the EOD school, and I think John alluded to this earlier, has been a moving target. I think there are more questions than answers for that. I think that at the meeting, of course, I know you, Colonel, I know you can't comment on it right now because of being in the process, but I think that one of the things that was asked for was an actual physical testing of some of the ordinances and that kind of thing from the citizenry. I think that needs to be done. I think that under certain, there's a mutual, not a mutual aid, an MOU, I believe it's under environmental justice, that the DOD did sign that looks at, part of that is being, what are the impacts on minority groups in the area, and also what the economic impact is of a federal installation next to a residential facility. And I think that needs to be assessed as part of this as well. That was done by executive order in 1994. So I think that is also something that we need to look at. When we started this process, it started off as a sound issue, and we have moved more towards other things as we've looked at it. I wasn't ready to touch this at first, but as I started talking to John and started looking at some of the things that happened and what was going on in the actual studies and what have you, I found myself saying, wait a minute, some of these things aren't right, and the Army wasn't following its own protocol, i.e. we have changed to 3 different environmental studies.
Well, Mr. Popovich, if I may correct that, they're not, that's not the scope of the NEPA law. They're not 3 different studies. Okay, there was an EIS that studies to bring the school here. It's titled "Those Things That Cannot Be Conducted at Fort Lee." Okay.
If you'd like to correct my comments, Colonel, you can do that in writing, please.
And I will. And the second is rescoping, and the third is moving it to what was a benefit for Port Tobacco Bay.
I think that there were questions raised about the noise. There's been questions raised about the scope and the impact of what types of